Princess Zara pressed her face against the cold window of her tower room, watching the strange ships descend from the starry sky. They were nothing like the elegant vessels of her people, the Valari. These ships looked rough and patched together, with scorch marks along their hulls and weapons that seemed bolted on as an afterthought. Yet somehow, they had broken through the Krex Empire's blockade that had trapped her world for 3 long years. "Another human fleet," whispered Neela, her personal guard and closest friend. "They keep coming, no matter how many die." Zara nodded slowly. The humans had been fighting the Krex for almost a decade now, ever since the Reptilian Empire had decided to expand into human space. What started as border skirmishes had grown into a galaxy-spanning war. The Krex were older, more advanced, and had conquered dozens of worlds. Most species either joined them willingly or were crushed beneath their military might. But not the humans. They just kept fighting. The princess had studied every battle report, every news broadcast that managed to slip through the communication blackout. Humans were supposed to be a young species, barely 200 years into space travel. Their technology was primitive compared to the Krex. Their ships were slower, their weapons weaker, their numbers smaller. By every logical calculation, they should have surrendered years ago. Instead, they had turned the war into something the galaxy had never seen before. Zara watched as the human ships engaged the Krex patrol vessels orbiting her planet. The alien ships were sleek and silver, their energy weapons painting bright lines across the darkness. The human ships responded with crude kinetic weapons, hurling chunks of metal at incredible speeds. When their ships took damage, instead of retreating for repairs, they would ram themselves into enemy vessels. "They fight like madmen," Neela observed, though her voice held a note of admiration. "No," Zara said quietly. "They fight like they have something to lose." The battle was brief but intense. The Krex patrol ships, caught off guard by the humans' arrival, were either destroyed or forced to retreat. As the debris cleared, Zara could see landing craft detaching from the human vessels and heading toward the planet's surface. Her heart raced. For 3 years, her people had been trapped under Krex occupation. The reptilian overlords had strip-mined their world, enslaved their population, and crushed any hint of resistance. Zara's own father, the king, had been executed for refusing to hand over the planet's quantum crystal reserves. Her brother had died leading a failed rebellion. She was all that remained of the royal line, kept alive only because the Krex found her useful as a symbol of their conquest. But now, the humans had come. Zara had heard stories about human liberation forces. They didn't fight for territory or resources like most species. They seemed to fight for principles that many aliens found difficult to understand: freedom, justice, the right to exist without oppression. Concepts that the pragmatic galactic community had long since abandoned in favor of survival and profit. The princess made a decision that would have horrified her advisors if any had still been alive. She pulled on her travel cloak and headed for the door. "Your Highness, where are you going?" Neela asked, alarmed. "To meet them," Zara replied. "If these humans are truly here to help us, I need to see it with my own eyes." The 2 young women slipped through the castle's back passages, avoiding the Krex guards who were scrambling to organize a defense. Zara knew every secret tunnel and hidden door in the ancient structure. As a child, she had played endless games of hide-and-seek with her brother through these same corridors. The memory brought a pang of grief, but she pushed it aside. There would be time for mourning later. They emerged from the castle through a servant's entrance and made their way through the occupied city. The Krex had built their garrison in the center of the capital, a brutal metal structure that clashed with the elegant spires of Valari architecture. Normally, the streets would be crawling with reptilian soldiers, but today they were all rushing toward the landing zones where the human forces were touching down. Zara and Neela reached the city's edge just as the first human dropships landed. The princess hid behind a cluster of ruins, her heart pounding as she watched the rear ramps lower. She had never seen a human before, only heard descriptions in the reports. They were supposed to be similar to her own people in basic structure, but smaller and more fragile. The first figure to emerge from the dropship made her breath catch in her throat. He was tall for a human, moving with a confident stride despite the chaos of battle erupting around him. His armor was scarred and dented, clearly having seen extensive combat, but it was his face that made Zara's world suddenly shift beneath her feet. Older now, hardened by war, but unmistakably the same features she remembered from a decade ago. The same dark hair, the same determined expression, the same way of tilting his head when he was thinking. Even the small scar above his left eyebrow, though she couldn't see it clearly from this distance, she knew it would be there. "Danny," she whispered. It seemed impossible. The shy, curious boy she had met during the diplomatic mission to the neutral station couldn't possibly be the same person as this hardened warrior stepping off a human warship. But as she watched him coordinate with his soldiers, directing them with hand signals, she somehow understood, despite never learning human military doctrine, she became more and more certain. 10 years ago, her father had taken her on a diplomatic mission to Nexus Station, a neutral trading post where species from across the galaxy conducted business. It was meant to be a learning experience for the young princess, a chance to see the wider galaxy before taking on more responsibilities. She had been 16 and eager to explore. That's where she had met Daniel Chen, a 17-year-old human whose parents were part of a trade delegation. He had been as curious about alien cultures as she was about the strange humans she had heard so much about. They had spent hours together, exploring the station's markets, trading stories about their respective worlds, and sharing the kind of innocent friendship that only young people could form. Danny had told her about Earth, about vast oceans and forests, about cities that grew upward instead of outward like Valari settlements. She had described her homeworld's crystal gardens and floating pavilions, the way their architecture danced with the wind instead of fighting it. He had been fascinated by her people's biotechnology, while she marveled at human mechanical engineering. For 2 wonderful weeks, they had been just 2 young people from different worlds, learning that perhaps they weren't so different after all. When the diplomatic mission ended and they had to part ways, Danny had given her a small device he had built himself. It was crude by Valari standards, but it could receive transmissions from human space. Through it, she had followed human news and developments, always wondering what had become of her friend. Now she knew. The battle around them intensified as more human forces landed and engaged the Krex garrison. Zara watched Danny, or whatever he was called now, as he led his troops with calm efficiency. There was something different about the way humans fought, she realized. Other species used warfare as a tool, a means to an end. For the humans, it seemed to be something deeper. They fought with a passion that bordered on religious fervor, as if the very act of resisting oppression was sacred to them. "Princess," Neela whispered urgently, "we need to go. If the Krex find us here." But Zara couldn't move. She watched as Danny's unit advanced through the city, methodically clearing each building of Krex forces. His soldiers didn't behave like other armies she had observed. They went out of their way to protect civilians, even at tactical disadvantage to themselves. When they found wounded Valari, they stopped to provide medical aid. When they encountered civilians too frightened to flee, they spoke in gentle tones despite not sharing a common language. This was why the humans kept fighting, Zara realized. It wasn't just about winning battles or claiming territory. They fought because they genuinely believed that every being in the galaxy deserved to be free. It was a concept so alien to the pragmatic galactic mindset that most species couldn't even comprehend it. But Zara understood. She had always understood, ever since those conversations with Danny on Nexus Station. Humans didn't fight for what they could gain. They fought for what they couldn't bear to lose. The sound of approaching aircraft made both young women look up. Krek's reinforcements were arriving, their sleek fighters screaming overhead toward the human landing zones. The battle was about to escalate significantly. "We have to warn them," Zara said suddenly. "Warn who?" Neela asked, confused. "The humans. I know the city better than they do. I know where the Kreks have their heavy weapons positioned, where their weak points are." Zara stood up, brushing dirt from her cloak. "If they're really here to liberate us, I'm going to help them do it." Before Neela could protest, Zara was already moving toward the human positions. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the makeshift perimeter Danny's unit had established around a damaged fountain. Human soldiers noticed her approach and raised their weapons, but something in her posture, or perhaps the royal circlet she still wore, made them hesitate. Danny emerged from behind cover, his rifle ready, but not quite aimed at her. Up close, Zara could see how much he had changed. The soft features of youth had been replaced by the sharp angles of a soldier. His eyes, once bright with curiosity, now held depths that spoke of loss and sacrifice. But when their gazes met across the rubble-strewn plaza, something flickered in his expression. Recognition. He lowered his weapon slowly, as if unable to believe what he was seeing. "Zara," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered it. "Hello, Danny," she replied in accented English, grateful that she had continued studying human languages over the years. "I think we need to talk." The princess, who had spent 3 years as a prisoner in her own castle, stood in the ruins of her capital city, facing the boy she had once known, who was now a battle-hardened warrior, fighting to free her world. Around them, the sounds of war echoed through the streets as two vastly different species struggled for the future of her planet. But in that moment, as they looked at each other across a decade of separation and a galaxy at war, they were just Zara and Danny again, two friends who had found each other in the darkest of times, when hope seemed as distant as the stars themselves. The makeshift command post buzzed with activity as human soldiers coordinated their advance through the city. Zara sat on a pile of rubble, watching Danny study holographic displays that showed troop movements and enemy positions. He had introduced himself to his men as Captain Chen, but when they spoke privately, he was still just Danny to her. "The Kreks have set up defensive positions here, here, and here," Zara said, pointing to locations on the tactical display. "But there's an old maintenance tunnel that runs beneath the government district. My brother used it during his rebellion attempt." Danny's expression softened at the mention of her brother. "I heard about Prince Kale. I'm sorry, Zara. The reports said he died fighting." "He died believing that someone would come to finish what he started," she replied quietly. "I never imagined it would be you." "Neither did I," Danny admitted. He gestured to his uniform, worn with the insignia of the Terran Liberation Corps. 10 years ago, I was planning to study xenobiology. I wanted to learn about other species, maybe work as a cultural attaché. Then the Kreks invaded Proxima Colony. Zara had heard about Proxima. It was one of the first major human settlements the Kreks had attacked, a peaceful research station with no military defenses. The Reptilian Empire had claimed it was a strategic necessity, but everyone knew it had been a test. They wanted to see how humanity would respond to the loss of innocent civilians. The answer had surprised the entire galaxy. Instead of seeking diplomatic solutions or accepting the loss, humanity had mobilized for total war, not just their military, but their entire civilization. Factory workers had retooled their production lines to build weapons. Scientists had abandoned peaceful research to develop new technologies of destruction. Children barely old enough to understand what war meant had begun training to replace fallen soldiers. "You changed your major?" Zara asked. "I changed everything," Danny said. "After Proxima, I realized that studying alien cultures wouldn't matter if there were no free cultures left to study. So I joined the Corps, worked my way up through the ranks, and here I am." "Here you are," she repeated, still struggling to reconcile the gentle boy she remembered with the hardened soldier before her. Danny seemed to read her thoughts. "I know I'm not the same person you knew on Nexus Station. War changes people, Zara. It has to, or you don't survive it." Before she could respond, one of his soldiers approached with urgent news. "Captain, we're picking up massive energy signatures from the Krex Citadel. Intelligence thinks they're powering up their planetary bombardment cannons." Zara felt her blood run cold. The orbital bombardment system had been one of the first things the Krex had installed after conquering her world. They had used it to destroy any city that showed signs of rebellion, turning entire populations to ash as an example to the rest. "How long until they're ready to fire?" Danny asked. 20 minutes, maybe less." "And our assault on the Citadel?" "Still pinned down at the outer perimeter. The Krex have concentrated their heavy armor there. We'd need hours to punch through, maybe days." Danny studied the tactical display, his jaw tight with concentration. Zara could see him calculating distances, weighing options, searching for a solution that would save both his forces and her people. It was the same expression he used to get when they played strategy games together on Nexus Station, but now the stakes were infinitely higher. "There might be another way," Zara said suddenly. All eyes turned to her. "The Citadel was built on top of the old royal palace. I know the building better than anyone. There are passages that the Krex never found, ways to get inside that bypass their defenses." "It would be a suicide mission," one of the soldiers pointed out. "Even if you could get a team inside, they'd be outnumbered 100 to 1. "Not necessarily," Zara replied, her mind racing as she remembered the palace's hidden secrets. "The bombardment controls are in what used to be my father's study. It's isolated from the rest of the complex, accessible through a private stairway that connects to the old escape tunnels. A small team could reach it without alerting the main garrison." Danny was already shaking his head. "Absolutely not. I'm not putting you in danger. You're the last member of the royal family. Your people need you alive." "My people need to not be incinerated from orbit," Zara shot back. "And I'm the only one who knows the way. You'd be walking blind without me." "Then you can guide us to the entrance and wait somewhere safe while we handle the rest." Zara stood up, drawing herself to her full height, with all the regal bearing her tutors had drilled into her. "Captain Chen, I appreciate your concern, but I am Princess Zara of the Valari, daughter of King Theron, and I will not hide while others fight for my world. Either I come with you, or I go alone." Danny stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. The boy who had been her friend warred with the soldier who had a mission to complete. Finally, he sighed. "You always were stubborn," he said. "Fine, but you follow my orders exactly. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We get in, destroy the bombardment controls, and get out. Understood?" "Understood." The infiltration team consisted of 6 people: Danny, Zara, 2 human demolition specialists, and 2 of Danny's most experienced soldiers. They moved through the city's underground tunnels, following routes that Zara had memorized as a child. The ancient stonework was exactly as she remembered it, though now it was scarred by Krex modifications and crude technological additions. As they moved through the darkness, Zara found herself walking beside Danny. The proximity brought back memories of their time on Nexus Station, when they had explored the station's maintenance areas and service corridors just for the adventure of it. Do you remember the time we got lost in the station's central hub? She asked quietly. Danny smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she had seen from him since their reunion. You insisted you knew a shortcut to the observation deck. We ended up in the waste processing center. The smell was terrible. But we found that injured bird creature in the vents. What did you call it? A shimmerwing, Zara replied. They're native to Altair 7th. Someone's pet had probably escaped and gotten hurt. You spent 3 hours nursing it back to health. You helped, Danny pointed out. You knew exactly what it needed to eat, how to care for it. That's when I realized how much you actually cared about other species. Most royalty I'd heard about were too caught up in politics to worry about individual creatures. And that's when I realized that not all humans were the aggressive warmongers everyone said they were, Zara replied. You were gentle with that little creature, patient, kind. They reached a junction in the tunnels, and Zara held up her hand to signal a stop. Above them, she could hear the heavy footsteps of Krek's patrols. The reptilian soldiers were searching the upper levels, but they had never discovered the deeper tunnel system. This way, she whispered, leading them down a narrower passage that sloped upward toward the palace foundations. Zara, Danny said quietly as they walked. I need you to know something. The human fleet up there, we're not the only force involved in this operation. This is part of something bigger. What do you mean? The Galactic Council has been watching this war for years, waiting to see which way it would go. Most of them expected humanity to lose quickly, maybe seek a negotiated surrender. When we kept fighting, it made them nervous. They started wondering if maybe they had misjudged our capabilities. Zara nodded. She had heard rumors through her limited information networks. Several species had begun quietly providing support to human forces, not out of any love for humanity, but because they were starting to fear what would happen if the Krek's empire grew too powerful. But that's not why we're here, Danny continued. We're not fighting for political advantage or strategic positioning. We're fighting because what the Kreks are doing to worlds like yours is wrong, and we'll keep fighting until it stops. They reached the base of the palace, where ancient Valari stonework met the crude metal additions the Kreks had bolted onto the structure. Zara felt a surge of anger at seeing how the invaders had defaced her ancestral home, but she pushed the emotion aside. There would be time for rage later. The entrance is through here, she said, indicating a section of wall that looked identical to every other section. But when she pressed her hand to a specific stone and whispered a phrase in Old Valari, part of the wall swung inward on hidden hinges. Palace security systems, she explained to the amazed humans. Biometric locks keyed to the royal bloodline. The Kreks never found them because they don't understand our biotechnology. The passage beyond was narrow and steep, carved directly into the living rock beneath the palace. As they climbed, Zara could hear the sounds of activity above them. The Krek's garrison was preparing for the human assault they knew was coming, concentrating their forces at the obvious entry points while remaining oblivious to the infiltrators moving through the building's hidden arteries. They emerged into what had once been her father's private study. The room had been stripped of its elegant furnishings and converted into a control center for the orbital bombardment system. Banks of computers and targeting displays covered the walls, while Krek's technicians worked frantically to bring the weapons online. 4 guards, 6 technicians, Danny whispered after peering around the corner. We take them quietly if possible. Zara, stay back and guide us to the main controls. What followed was a brief, silent struggle as the human soldiers eliminated the Krek's personnel with practiced efficiency. Zara tried not to look at the bodies as she led the demolitions specialists to the primary control console. This is it, she said, recognizing the targeting displays that showed her world from orbit. Destroy this, and they can't fire the bombardment cannons. The specialists began placing their charges while Danny kept watch at the entrance, but as they worked, Alarms began blaring throughout the palace. The Kreks had discovered the bodies of their missing patrol. "How long?" Danny asked urgently. 2 minutes, came the reply. "We don't have 2 minutes. They'll be here in less than 1. Zara looked at the control console, then at the positioning of the explosive charges. An idea formed in her mind, desperate and dangerous, but potentially workable. "Danny," she said, "what if we don't just destroy the controls? What if we turn the weapons on the Kreks fleet instead?" He stared at her. "Is that possible?" "The targeting system is still functional. If I can access the command protocols." She moved to the console, her fingers flying over controls she had watched Kreks technicians use for months. "My father was forced to observe these operations. I learned how their systems work." "Zara, no, it's too risky. If you make a mistake—" "If I make a mistake, we die anyway," she interrupted. "But if this works, we can take out their orbital support and give your fleet a real chance." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors outside. Danny made a split-second decision. "Do it." Zara's hands danced over the alien controls, accessing targeting protocols and weapon systems with growing confidence. The Kreks had never imagined that a member of the conquered species might learn to use their own weapons against them. "Got it," she said as the targeting displays shifted, showing Kreks warships in orbit instead of surface targets. "Firing in 3, 2, 1. The palace shook as the massive orbital cannons discharged, sending streams of destructive energy toward the Kreks fleet above. Through the control room's windows, they could see brilliant flashes of light as the beams found their targets. "Incredible!" one of the soldiers breathed. "She's using their own weapons to destroy their fleet." But their victory was short-lived. The doors burst open as Krek soldiers poured into the room, their weapons raised. Danny's team returned fire, but they were vastly outnumbered. In the chaos of battle, Zara found herself separated from the others, trapped behind the control console as energy beams scorched the air above her head. She looked up to see a Kreks warrior bearing down on her, his weapon aimed at her heart. Time seemed slow as she realized she wouldn't be able to dodge in time. Then Danny was there, throwing himself between them. The energy beam meant for her struck him instead, and he collapsed to the floor with a cry of pain. "Danny!" Zara screamed, but before she could reach him, everything went dark as something struck the back of her head. Her last sight was of Danny lying motionless on the floor of her father's study, blood pooling beneath him as the sounds of battle faded into unconsciousness. Zara awoke in chains. The cold metal bit into her wrists as she tried to move, her head pounding from whatever had knocked her unconscious. She was in a detention cell deep within the palace, one of the rooms the Kreks had converted into holding areas for prisoners. The air was thick with the smell of fear and desperation. "You're awake," said a harsh voice in accented standard. General Thark, the Kreks commander who had overseen the occupation of her world, stood outside the energy barrier that kept her imprisoned. His reptilian features were twisted with rage. "I must admit, Princess, your little stunt was quite impressive. Using our own weapons against our fleet was creative." "Where is Captain Chen?" Zara demanded, struggling to sit up despite the chains. "The human terrorist? He's being treated for his wounds. We need him alive for interrogation." Thark's lipless mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "You see, we've learned something interesting from our prisoners. This attack wasn't just a random raid. Your human friend is part of something much larger." Zara's heart sank. If the Kreks had captured other members of Danny's team, they might have extracted information about the broader human strategy. But she forced herself to show no emotion. Her years as a captive princess had taught her to hide her feelings from her captors. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said calmly. "Of course not. But perhaps Captain Chen will be more talkative when we show him what happens to alien royalty who defy the Empire. The general gestured, and 2 Krek soldiers entered the cell. They roughly hauled Zara to her feet and began dragging her through the corridors of what had once been her home. As they moved through the palace, she could see the damage from the battle. Scorch marks on the walls, debris from destroyed furniture, and the occasional blood stain that marked where someone had fallen. But she also noticed something else. The Kreks seemed nervous. Their usual arrogant confidence had been replaced by a tension that spoke of real concern. The destruction of their orbital fleet had clearly shaken them more than they wanted to admit. They brought her to the palace's main hall, where her father had once held court. The Kreks had converted it into a command center, with communication equipment and tactical displays showing the ongoing battle throughout the city. What Zara saw on those displays made her breath catch. The human ground forces were advancing rapidly through the capital. Without orbital support, the Kreks' defenses were crumbling. Red markers on the tactical map showed Kreks' positions being overrun one by one, while blue markers representing human forces pushed steadily toward the palace itself. "Your human friends are quite persistent," General Thark observed, following her gaze. "But they're too late to save you, or their precious captain." He nodded to the guards, who brought in another prisoner. Zara's heart clenched as she saw Danny being dragged between 2 Krek soldiers. He was wounded but conscious, his left arm in a crude bandage where the energy beam had hit him. When he saw her, their eyes met across the hall. "Let her go, Thark," Danny said, his voice steady despite his obvious pain. "Your quarrel is with humanity, not with the Valari royal family." "On the contrary, Captain Chen, the princess has proven herself to be an active combatant. She used our own weapons to destroy Imperial vessels. That makes her a terrorist, subject to summary execution." General Thark drew his sidearm and pointed it at Zara's head. "But I'm willing to make a deal. Call off your forces, order them to retreat, and I'll allow the princess to live." Danny's jaw tightened. "I can't do that. Even if I wanted to, I don't have the authority to call off the entire operation." "Then perhaps I need to provide better motivation." The Krek's general raised his weapon, but before he could fire, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. One of his subordinates rushed to a communication console. "General, we're receiving a transmission from the Terran fleet. They're demanding our immediate surrender." "Impossible. We destroyed their ships when they first arrived." "No, sir. This is a different fleet. A much larger one." The main display screen activated, showing the space above Zara's world. Where before there had been only a few human vessels, now there were dozens. Massive ships of a design Zara had never seen before, their hulls gleaming with advanced armor and bristling with weapons. At the center of the formation was a vessel so large it seemed to blot out the stars. "This is Admiral Sarah Reyes of the Terran Liberation Fleet," came a voice over the communication system. "To all Krek's forces on and around Valaris Prime, you are ordered to surrender immediately. Any further hostile action against human forces or Valari civilians will be met with overwhelming retaliation." General Thark's composure finally cracked. "How many ships?" 87 vessels confirmed, sir, including 5 dreadnoughts and what appears to be their new flagship, the TLS Defiance." Zara saw Danny's expression change. There was something in his eyes, a knowledge that he was trying to hide. Whatever this new fleet was, he had been expecting it. "You knew," she realized. "You knew they were coming." "The first wave was just the beginning," Danny admitted. "We've been fighting this war for 10 years, Zara. We've learned a few things about strategy in that time." General Thark spun to face him. "What are you talking about?" "Think about it," Danny said, his voice growing stronger despite his wounds. Why would humanity send a small force to attack a heavily defended world? Why risk everything on what looks like a desperate gamble? The truth was starting to dawn on the Krek's commander. This was a diversion. More than that, it was bait. Every time you moved ships to reinforce this system, every time you pulled resources from other sectors to deal with our desperate attack, You were playing right into our hands. While your attention was focused here, the main Terran fleet was positioning itself for the real assault. Zara felt a surge of pride mixed with amazement. The shy boy she had known on Nexus Station had grown into a master strategist. But more than that, he had become something the galaxy had never seen before. A human who understood that sometimes the greatest victory came not from strength, but from making your enemy defeat himself. The Krex Empire has ruled through fear and superior firepower, Danny continued. But you never learned to fight an enemy who wasn't afraid of you, who was willing to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. Every human who died in this war just made the rest of us more determined to finish what we started. The communication system crackled again. Krex forces, this is your final warning. Surrender now, or face the consequences. General Thark looked around his command center at the faces of his subordinates. She could see the fear in their reptilian features, the growing realization that their empire's superiority was not as absolute as they had believed. General, one of his officers said quietly, perhaps we should consider negotiation. The fleet outside could reduce this planet to dust. Never, Thark snarled. The Empire does not negotiate with terrorists. He raised his weapon toward Zara again. If we're going to die here, at least I'll have the satisfaction of... The shot that rang out came not from the general's weapon, but from one of his own officers. Thark collapsed to the floor, a look of surprise frozen on his reptilian features. The officer who had fired stepped forward, holstering his sidearm. Commander Skal of the Imperial Fourth Fleet, he said in heavily accented standard. On behalf of the remaining Krex forces in this system, I hereby surrender to the Terran Liberation Fleet. Danny looked as surprised as everyone else in the room. Why? Because, Captain Chen, some of us have been watching this war for 10 years as well. We've seen what happens when the Empire faces an enemy that refuses to be conquered. We've seen entire fleets destroyed by human forces that should have been easily defeated. And we've begun to understand something that General Thark never did. Commander Skal gestured to the tactical displays showing human advances throughout the city. This war isn't just about territory or resources. It's about something far more dangerous to the Empire, an idea. The idea that any species, no matter how small or weak, has the right to resist oppression. That no empire, no matter how powerful, has the right to enslave entire worlds. He paused, looking directly at Zara. And ideas, Captain Chen, are the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Krex forces throughout the system began laying down their arms as word of the surrender spread. Human ships landed in the capital, bringing medical teams to treat the wounded and engineers to begin repairing the damage. The massive fleet in orbit served as a reminder that humanity's reach now extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. Zara found herself in the palace's medical bay, where human doctors were treating Danny's wounds. The energy beam had damaged his shoulder badly, but the medics assured her that he would recover fully. So what happens now? She asked as she sat beside his bed. Now? Danny smiled, and for a moment she could see the young man she had known on Nexus Station. Now we rebuild. Your world is free again, Zara. Your people can choose their own destiny. And you? Will you stay and help with the reconstruction? Danny's expression grew thoughtful. For a while, maybe. But there are other worlds that need liberating, other species that deserve freedom. The war isn't over just because we won here. The Krex Empire is vast, Zara pointed out. It could take decades to free all their conquered worlds. Then we'll take decades, Danny replied simply. However long it takes, we'll keep fighting. That's what humans do, Zara. We don't give up. Later, as the twin suns of her world set behind the palace spires, Zara stood on the balcony where she had once watched Krex ships descend from the sky. Now the stars were filled with human vessels, their running lights like beacons of hope in the darkness. Danny joined her, his arm in a sling, but his spirit clearly undaunted. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the city below as her people emerged from 3 years of occupation to celebrate their freedom. "Danny," she said finally, "on Nexus Station you asked me what I thought the future would hold for our species, whether humans and aliens could ever truly understand each other. I remember, you said it would depend on whether we could learn to see past our differences to what we had in common." "I was wrong," Zara said. "It's not about seeing past our differences, it's about celebrating them. Humans aren't like other species, and that's exactly why the galaxy needs you. You fight for principles that others have forgotten. You refuse to accept that oppression is inevitable. You prove that even the smallest flame can light up the darkness." Danny smiled. "And you Volari prove that there are others out there worth fighting for. People who remember what freedom means, who refuse to surrender their dignity even when all hope seems lost." As they watched, fireworks began exploding over the capital city. Her people were celebrating not just their liberation, but the return of hope itself. In the distance, Zara could see Human and Velari working together to clear debris from the streets, to tend to the wounded, to begin the long process of rebuilding. "The boy I knew wanted to study alien cultures," she observed. "The man you've become is helping to create new ones." "Maybe that's what I was always meant to do," Danny replied. "Just not in the way I expected." Above them, the stars shone down on a galaxy that was beginning to change. The Krex Empire still controlled hundreds of worlds, but its aura of invincibility had been shattered. Other species were beginning to whisper about resistance, about the possibility that oppression was not an immutable law of the universe. And at the center of it all were the humans, a young species that had taken the oldest dream in the galaxy, the dream of freedom, and turned it into reality through sheer force of will. The princess and the captain stood together on the balcony of the liberated palace, no longer the children they had been on Nexus Station, but also no longer strangers. They were something new, representatives of two species that had found common cause in the endless struggle between tyranny and freedom. In the years to come, that alliance would spread across the stars, touching every world where beings dared to dream of something better than subjugation. The Krex Empire would discover what other tyrants throughout history had learned too late, that some ideas, once planted, cannot be destroyed. And the idea of freedom, carried by humans but embraced by countless others, would prove to be the most powerful force the galaxy had ever known. The real war was just beginning,